Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics FPL. It's Fran here, and I'm back with my Game Week 13 review. Now, ultimately, this week was actually pretty horrendous, given the fact that I think I set myself up to have a good game week. When you look back, of course, at my team, I think the only decision that I've made that was grossly incorrect so far is looking to be the Guaita pick, the move away from Sanchez. But still, I think that was more of the fact that Brighton were facing off with a very, very poor Leeds team, and we'll see exactly what Guaita can do versus Leeds next week. Hopefully, he'll redeem himself and get a clean sheet. The fixtures are still quite good in the near future, at least for Guaita, and seemingly quite bad for a counterpart in McCarthy. Obviously, Ramsdale is the one who's basically going to be the one that got away from me for the remainder of the season until my next wild card. But I still think Guaita has a chance to surpass Sanchez in terms of hauls over the next few weeks and make a comeback. As far as the rest of my team, clearly very unfortunate with the kind of postponement of the Burnley and Tottenham game. I didn't expect that to happen, and this is naturally what happens when you're dealt with a bad hand in FPL. Nothing to do with strategy in a sense. You can't predict the weather. In fact, most people were expecting the Liverpool game to be postponed, but we ended up this week with the Tottenham and Burnley game being postponed, which of course hurt me because I took a -4 for the specific reason of getting Bernram out of my team, bringing in Cornet to get a kind of nice differential versus Tottenham. Still, the next few fixtures for Cornet are nice. I'm happy to have him. But it really stinks, right, to not be able to play Kane, especially since I set my team up in a way where I knew Foden was going to be benched because of the way Pep Guardiola is with injuries, and I had a great pick in Jota instead. Of course, Jota has extremely high effective ownership, and I was kind of once again not really moving up too far in the ranks before the Chelsea game, which I predicted was going to be a bad transfer week, right? Unless you really had no transfers at all to make. It didn't make sense for me to get Chelsea. I'm really happy that Chelsea lost their clean sheet. That was something I expected and wanted to happen. But I'm still actually now left with a decision to make between, when I look at my transfers overall, between what to do with Chilwell, right? Chilwell seems to be either an option to go easily into James because I now have the money in the bank from dropping Foden, or I could just simply go into Alonso. The one thing I'll say about Alonso is that from actually watching the Chelsea game, I wasn't very impressed with Alonso and his performance versus United. Now, of course, Aaron Wan-Bissaka is, I guess, quite an individual, tough, one-on-one threat for Alonso to be faced with, but he did really look like he lost a step, and the next game is in a few days' time, so you could argue that either one, Tuchel had subbed him off so that he could actually play Alonso and have him rested due to his age versus Watford. The alternative point of view is that Alonso just doesn't look as appealing a pick as someone like Chilwell, as someone like Reece James. I'm not comparing him to someone like Walker, who clearly doesn't play a hugely offensive role for Man City, but he definitely does seem to be, worthy of that kind of price decrease. We did, however, still see that Alonso had a fantastic start this season, and maybe it's the case where I would like to get Alonso. For me, the question is, am I at a crossroads with the back four? Are we still 100% on the back four? I think part of the back four as well, the reasons for that was really to get Chilwell, who looked fantastic. And now that we've lost Chilwell, we're once again dealt with a decision. I think a lot of people will be actually thinking about going to Lamptey. Whether I'm moving away from Cody or Livramento to Lamptey in the near future is another question. I think it's going to be Livramento, to be honest. Hey guys, just before we continue with the video, I'd love to shout out OneFootball. They're a fantastic football app that you can actually use to stay in track with all your football news, all your football preferences, all in one place. The beauty of the app is that you can basically subscribe to notifications for any specific team you'd like to follow, any specific league you'd like to follow, or you can actually keep it simple, keep it very private, and make sure that you turn on the app whenever you want, and keep it quiet like that. For me, I actually like to use the app when I'm basically outside of the house or just trying to check up on games, maybe see what kind of lineups are posted, what kind of press conferences I might have missed, any kind of recaps for games, any previews for games as well, with kind of written commentary on that sort of thing, and also kind of journalistic takes on football as well, all surmised into one place. Personally, for me, I also like to follow the European leagues, try to see what's going on with the midweek games on the kind of app, and also staying track of the international events, like for example the World Cup qualifiers that just passed in the last international break. Hope you guys check out the app in the link in the description below. There's also another option for a lot of people who play with back fours to move into someone like a Ben Johnson, right? If you no longer want to pursue the back four. For me though, obviously I think this is a clear week where I make a safe transfer, match the EO, match the player who's actually playing in a world-class level, and Tuchel clearly has his kind of arm around and trusts. Because if you watch the game, for example, James is someone who was allowed to play the full 90 minutes for Chelsea, and Alonso is someone who, when they actually needed to attack, when they needed to provide, he didn't really seem to see that Alonso was the option to keep. James is clearly someone he trusts in both on the defense and offensive end, and for me, I think the move simply is going to be Chilwell to James. There's a very short turnaround within this game week, which is why this is called the Game Week 14 Plans video. There's not much time to really think about it. There's no kind of European fixtures in hand. I think it's a safe game week to really just move on to someone like James. The question as well, if I, let's say, do go for the James transfer, is who do I actually pick for the next week? Because when I'm looking at my team now, I'm actually pretty happy to play most of the players who are on the field. Cornet versus Wolves, I think, is still a good game. I actually think Wolves have, in a sense, been lucky to get a clean sheet the last 2 games. They've been peppered with a lot of expected goals. They've created a lot of chances for the enemy team, and they've been, in a sense, lucky to get away with 2 clean sheets, which obviously I'm not going to complain about because I had Cody in my team and I really needed those clean sheets. I still might play Cody this week, and I might play a back 4 if I even go for James. Because the way I see it is, let's say if I get James and he gets rested versus Watford, I don't really think that he'll come into the game unless the game is, in a stage where Chelsea really need to chase for the game, and James is seen as an appealing option to kind of swing the tide of the game. In my opinion, I think this Watford side are actually quite leaky. Hopefully, Tuchel sees it as an opportunity to just simply rest James for the full 90 minutes, and maybe I'm still happy to play with this team for the game week, right? I also have a little bit of a conflict here with Rafinha, in my opinion. I think him and Tony realistically are the 2 pieces that I would like to move into my bench this game week. The question is who for, or who should stay on rather. And the way I'm leaning is probably towards Tony at this point in time. I know Rafinha has the better fixture. Crystal Palace at home is probably a nicer opponent than Tottenham, playing at Tottenham Stadium. And for me, I just think that the one question mark is Leeds still look absolutely diabolical in terms of creating chances. But Brentford, you could argue, are in similar territory, right? We kind of got lucky because of the Tony penalty, and I can't say too much about that. Whether he actually creates a chance in open play, he can score in open play, is another question, because I think Tottenham's defense have been extremely poor. I've mentioned constantly about the fact that they should still be attacked at this point in time, and I think it will take a few weeks for Conte to actually find his preferred backline, in a sense. So for me, I'm probably going to move towards, playing James versus Watford, and then having Rafinha or Tony on first bench. Likely right now, I'm thinking to drop Tony into the bench, but we'll probably deliberate on that if we get any press conference news and any kind of late transfers. In terms of Livramento, he's probably going to be second on my bench. I'm not too fond of Southampton right now. I don't think defensively they're as great a side as we all foresaw, and that was actually backed up by the defensive stats as well. When we were actually kind of reviewing, the full season stats so far, I think in the previous podcast with Pete, and the way things stand, Livramento probably going to be second bench. Mendy stays the same, Steele stays the same, nothing to really change there, and those are probably going to be my plans this game week. In terms of the price rises and price transfers, if we actually move on to that, so James is actually extremely close to a price rise. Whether that's actually the case, I'm not so certain. I think this is because a lot of people who were still owning Chilwell were actually thinking to make the more progressive move this week, somewhat similar to me, where I had moved away from Foden to Jota, and therefore I now have some surplus in funds, or at least, they didn't want to attack the Man United game because I think it was quite unreasonable to do so, right? So in that kind of context, I can understand why James has hit a price rise. He played the full 90 minutes and he looks like a great asset. I still think I'm probably going to go for James because I think Alonso is giving me some questions in terms of his performance in the game and whether he can actually contribute to this Chelsea setup. Tuchel has constantly mentioned the fact that he can play some of his wingers in this kind of left wing back position. Whether he actually does do that is another question for me. I think Hudson-Odoi looked quite good, so I don't really see how he gets shifted away from his left wing position. So we once again have to wait and see. I think with that approach, for me, the safer play is to go for James. I think I'm probably going to do that. In terms of other price rises, Cancelo's expected. I think it's once again a reflective of another move where people are moving away from a player like Diaz and moving into Cancelo. At one point in the game before, Lanzini's fantastic goal, Cancelo was set for 2 bonus points. The dangerous thing, of course, is his effective ownership in those top ranks is ludicrous. Bernardo is someone who I think is probably a move away from Foden that a lot of people have pursued, or at least a move away from players like Benrahma if people have cash. Smith Rowe is a bit of a weird one because, of course, I think it's part and parcel due to the fact that Saka was injured. But I think you also have to factor in that will actually really hamper Arsenal's attack. So for me, I don't really see Smith Rowe as an extremely wise move. I think he also has some tough games in the distance. And for me, I would probably say that I would like to go with someone in the midfield like a Gallagher or a Cornet at this point in time. Cornet was obviously unlucky to play the Burnley game, and Gallagher, yes, it was a bit dismaying to see Crystal Palace lose, but I think we can justifiably say that Aston Villa looked quite interesting. McGinn is, of course, another one of those box-to-box midfielders who I'm sure will interest some people who are looking for these really, really budget picks that are kind of like Kovacic, but I'm not too interested in him. Salah and Trent still close to the rise, Cornet close to another rise, Pukki close to another rise. Nothing too interesting here. I'm not that interested in Regular at this moment in time. Jota definitely probably going to be pegged for another rise. As we've all been saying, he's clearly underpriced. If we go to price decreases, Benrahma's once again set for another fall, so I'm pretty happy to have moved on from him ultimately, and actually managed to kind of bag a little bit of cash on the way out. Nothing too, I think, extravagant here. Pulisic dropping once again just due to the fact that I think he's obviously overpriced as a Chelsea midfielder, someone who doesn't actually get many minutes, especially when you compare, for example, the Jota's price that we just looked at. And nothing too interesting. If we actually look at the trends, though, let's have a look at forwards, because I think forwards are going to be where a lot of people are moving away. And it seems like people are once again going into Vardy, which is super interesting. I think also a lot of people are dismissing King. A lot of people are going to Dennis because he's actually the one who, if we actually look on points, has hauled the most this season in terms of forwards who are not, ludicrously priced. So, Dennis is so close to Antonio there. But my question mark for Dennis really is, do you play Dennis over the next 2 game weeks? And the answer for me is definitely going to be no. And then you have probably a few weeks of Dennis before the AFCON. And then for me, it makes more sense to actually own King during that period because there's once again a good set of fixtures around here where it probably makes sense to hold King. I think the one other difference is that Dennis is a bit cheaper than other players, and perhaps that's why people are more favorable of Dennis. But I would actually argue that they're both similar options for me. Maybe King makes a little bit more sense as Watford earn a few more penalties in the near future. Hwang is someone that people are moving away from. Jimenez as well, I imagine. As I said with Norwich, or Wolves rather, I don't think they're actually creating enough chances for us to spend too much money into Jimenez. Of course, he was the one who's actually hauling, and Hwang has actually had 0 shots on target in the last 4 game weeks. So I can completely understand people moving into or moving away from players like Hwang and moving into someone like King and Dennis, who, as I said, Watford seem to be quite a feast or famine team where they're actually scoring consistent goals, creating a lot of goals, not very good defensively, but will probably win games or lose games as opposed to drawing games and keeping the scoreline quite low. Antonio is another big asset that people are moving away from. Interestingly, a lot of people are moving into, say, Maximin and Tony. I would still say Tony has quite a few games left, and as I said, for my own transfers, the plan is to move from Tony to King eventually, since Watford's next few fixtures are still very poor. Antonio is another question mark for me because I think obviously I can probably do a -4 in the week after this where Antonio plays Brighton, and think about a -4 where I drop the Antonio into another midfielder or another defender. The question I think remains to be seen whether Alonso is interesting, whether he actually keeps his place in this Chelsea side and seems to be a permanent fixture, or if there's another midfielder that I'm missing out on, right? Because we know the season is definitely going to open up viabilities for a 5 midfield formation. I can definitely move Mendy from my team, if we have a look at it quickly, into someone like a Foden, into a Gundogan, or into a Bernardo Silva. So Gundogan was another kind of name that was kind of inserted into things because he finally scored a goal, which people have been waiting for. He was obviously that kind of massive differential last season where he went on a massive goal scoring tear, and people obviously have him kind of fresh in their minds. But yeah, I think that is going to be the one missing piece in my midfield, arguably. Maybe Gallagher as well as someone I can consider to stretch my midfield into a 5-piece. But I think Antonio for me is the one who probably has to make way in the subsequent week, right? So if I kind of draft out something right now, if I, let's say, go into James, who's going to be quite costly. If I go into James, if I drop Antonio and I drop Mendy, and then go for someone like King maybe instead. Then I actually still have 7.0 in the bank to maybe go for someone like Bernardo Silva, even though I'm not too close to that. Maybe I actually have to force myself to going Dennis. Um, a lot. Antonio can obviously also be a 4.5 option. Someone like Gelhardt from Leeds, who's gotten some minutes. Or I could just go for a 4.4 player who just never plays. That's another option, and that will kind of get me enough money to stretch into someone like a Bernardo or someone like a Gundogan at that point in time. Right now, I don't have any kind of set decisions. I think the plan really is to just go in for James, and I probably have to make that plan quite quickly. So honestly, you know what? I think just for the long-term health of this team, and honestly, I hope James is suffering from no injuries. I'm definitely going to make the transfer now, and I'm going to move away from Chilwell into James and confirm that in front of you guys. So that's it, guys. That's my plans for the week. I've actually showed you guys basically what I'm going to do for the week. We'll see what happens in terms of my team selection, whether I have to make a -4 for something that miraculously comes up. Hopefully not. But the plan, as I said, is to go for James this week, and I've already executed on that just to avoid the kind of price rise and make sure that I still have a little bit of budget in my team to spread things around just in case there's any sort of emergencies. But that's it for me this game week. I hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead and no cancellations of games hopefully, and hopefully I get a little bit of a return for going with Cornet, restored back for him missing a game, but we'll see what happens. Hope you guys have a wonderful week.